Hi, and welcome to this new series focused in around the environments. We'll still be using Lyra as our standard platform, but I thought in this series I'd spend a bit of time in maybe shorter pieces talking about how you can kind of work within your environment, build up your environment towards your end product game. And so in this short video, I'm going to walk through getting a few marketplace, actually just getting a few assets online, and some of the problems you might experience when trying to import them into your game, and what are the fixes to correct those problems all the way along. So in this series, we will be using Blender for anything we have to do with 3D modeling that we can't do inside the editor, or where it's easier to do in Blender over the editor. We'll be using GIMP, which is a free texture application. And so between Blender and GIMP, you should be able to do most things with either models and assets or textures and be able to then import them into the engine. We went ahead and downloaded this rock pack. There are sort of 6 rocks that are in this download from TurboSquid. You can look at the link here, pull it down yourself, follow along, or find other assets that you like and want to use. So we're going to be pulling those in and showing you some of the messages and issues you're going to have straight out of the gate, and then how to fix those. We also went over to the free PBR material library, where you can download various materials, and we're going to show you kind of how to maybe optimize these a little bit more and put them in your game engine. So we're going to use this Ocean Rock PBR material, and we're going to use the rocks from TurboSquid. So you can go ahead and download both of those, and then we'll pick up the process. All right, so I've gone ahead and downloaded both the low poly rock and the low poly rock zip and the texture file. So the first thing in this PBR texture is we don't need the preview, so we can delete that. And we don't need the height map, so we can delete that. So we end up with our diffuse or albedo. We have our ambient inclusion map, our metal map, our normal map, and our roughness map. So these are the 5 maps. And then we have our FBX, which contains the rocks from the application. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to drag that FBX over the editor and drop it in. And I'm going to go ahead and build nanite right away. I'm going to build collisions if I need those. Your scale will be at 1, which will make these rocks pretty big. So I'm bringing them in at 10%. A very common Blender to Unreal is that their scales are different by default. So you do tend to be adjusting scale when you're importing and exporting effectively. I'm not going to create materials. I no need to create materials. There are no textures in here, so you don't need to do that. But then I'm going to hit import all. And the first thing you'll notice, and this is quite common, is you'll get this no smoothing group information was found for this FBX. This is typical when you're pulling assets, and it has to do with how those assets were exported out of their authoring program and what Blender expects on the import. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to fix this problem before we move any further. So I've jumped over into Blender, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm basically going to delete the cube out of the scene. I'm actually going to delete the light and the camera as well. I'm going to go ahead and import that FBX file. And I'm not going to change anything on the import. All right, so you'll notice that it imported each of the individual meshes. So all 6 mesh. And there they are. And I'm really not going to do anything here other than I'm going to immediately export to an FBX. And I'm going to name it this fixed. I've already done this once. What you need to do is go to geometry, and instead of the smoothing group normals only, use the smoothing group face. This will actually do the smoothing at the face. I think you can do edge as well. I tend to use face. And when you change that smoothing group to face, that will fix the error. So we're going to go ahead and export that. Then we're going to jump back to our folder and grab our fixed version. Did I delete those? I did not. Delete those mesh. Close that window. And generate 0.1, no, import all. And you notice that we didn't get the smoothing group. So we're past the smoothing group problem. I'm going to go ahead and save all. And I'm going to drag one into my scene. Let's just take this one. And let's take this one. All right, so now we discover our next problem with our mesh. Our pivot point for the mesh is not in the right spot. So this is a reasoning is that in Blender, this pivot point got applied to each of these meshes based on where it was relative to the origin. Now we can go in here and move the pivot points for each one of them, separate them into mesh files. There's a lot easier way to do that. So we're going to come in here. I'm just going to get in close to our rock. And you'll see that this rock, its pivot point is here. And this one, its pivot point is here. So we're going to go into the modeling view. And we're going to go to the XY. And there's this button called Edit Pivot. So we're going to go click that. And it's going to bring up this gizmo. And then I like to go left first. Yeah, there it is over there. So from the left view, I can, and I'm going to move these up to the top. I find that when using big rocks like this, putting the pivot point at the top is helpful because you tend to sink them into the landscape, and then the pivot point is kind of always above the landscape. So I'm shifting this pivot point here. If I look at it from the front, this is probably not the best one to be looking at. Hold on. Let me just do it this way. So I'm basically moving my pivot point to the approximate center. I don't need to do this perfect for this tutorial. And then I'm going to hit accept. And now that pivot point is there for that. When I look at this one, you'll see that its pivot point is way over there. So I'm going to edit the pivot point, drag it into position, move it down, and basically spend as much time as you need to get your pivot point relative to your rock where you want it. I'm going to have mine there and accept it. And now you'll see that these two are no longer saved, because those are the two that we've edited the pivot points, and the pivot point editing affects the asset in the browser. So it's not, so let's do this. Let's save these. Let's take one that we haven't done, this particular one. See, its pivot point is way over here, even though the mesh is over here in the world. And let's duplicate it and put it over here, and duplicate it and put it over here. So we made 3 copies of it, and it's unedited here. We're going to select this one, edit the pivot point, drag it into position. Doing this rough, doesn't need to be perfect for the tutorial, and I'm going to accept that. And what you notice is as soon as I accepted this one, these two shifted to where they are relative to their pivot points. See, the pivot points are now in the right spot. So the meshes are all being updated with that new pivot point. And then that asset needs to be saved. All right, so that's fixing the smoothing groups using an export out of Blender appropriately, adjusting the pivot points on these meshes to make sure that they're in the right spot. But there's still one more problem with these that you can see if you kind of look closely at the way the texture is being applied to these rocks. In fact, you can see it a lot better if we create a material. So let's create a material and test. And I'm just going to bring in, I'm holding T to get a texture sample. And I think it was called checker. Yes, checker noise. And put that into base color. Save it. Now, I'm going to add a cube shapes. Cube right here. I'm going to take that cube, as soon as I can get it into the scene appropriately. Come on. I'm going to take that cube. I'm going to double it in size. Scale it up. I'm going to apply that material to it. And you'll see that the cube applies that checker pattern uniformly on all the faces. If I do the same thing to these meshes, and I drag that to the mesh, you'll see that there's a lot of weird stretching going on. All right, so if I drag that to another one, get it to this one. You'll see that the texture is being applied to the UV maps, and it doesn't look anywhere like this object does. In fact, neither of these two look the same. Those are actually the same, so that makes sense. So the way to fix this is you can actually do this right in Editor, and I found my results to be extremely good with this very simple method. Is you're going to go back into modeling and go down to the UVs and then select the object that has the bad UVs on it. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm just going to use Auto UV. And you'll note that it creates a checkered pattern that more or less looks even and consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And you'll see that it applies the red and blue in a much better position than it did on this one. Right? Still not perfect, but at least you've got better checker patterns. If I select this one, Auto UV, accept that, you'll see that the pattern has shifted into the way that's unwrapped. Now you can spend a lot of time unwrapping these rocks in the UV editor, in basically just editing your seams and working on your things. But I found that the very quick approach of taking something like this, so that Auto UV does a nice job at reapplying the UVs in a way that's more uniform, so that when you do apply your textures, they're gonna look better than the stretching that we saw beforehand. With our UVs straightened out, the next thing you would likely do is go grab that material. So I'm just going to go drag those textures in. And import those textures into the editor. And then I'm going to create another material. Open that up. Grab our new textures. I'm just going to plug those into the appropriate channel. So this is our base color. This is our roughness mask. This is our normal mask. This is metal. which we'll put right here. And this is our ambient inclusion. So we're going to put that right there. All right, and there's our rock. So we're going to save that. Come back here and move our rock to each of the objects in the world. And you'll see that the rock distributes, really, probably a better way of doing that, that the new rock texture isn't stretched across those pieces. Just to illustrate some more, if I take one that we have not fixed, so this one, and find its pivot point, which is way over here. And let's put our rock texture on that. You'll see that, look at the top and how that texture pattern is being applied. And you see it down this face as well. Versus the ones that we've adjusted, you have a more natural surface top. And so let's go do that to this rock right now so you can get to see the before and after. Here's the before. We're going to go into our modeling view, down to our UVs, and we're simply going to auto UV it. And again, you'll see the checker pattern on the top is much more consistent. And that's how we know that the rock texture is going to get applied consistently. So we're going to go ahead and accept that. And now if you look at the top of the rock, you have a much better layout of that texture across the top of the rock. All right, so now they're actually looking pretty good in. However, if this is what you did, you are going to end up with 5 2K textures being loaded into memory for every time you want to paint the rock. And that's a terrible waste of memory. And there's a whole lot we can do to optimize the use of memory around those textures. And that's what we're going to do next. The first and simple thing is to look at what we're dealing with as far as textures. Because we have a color channel and a normal channel, we also have an ambient occlusion, a metallic, and a rock, and a roughness, sorry. And those can actually be grayscale packed into one texture. So we can take these 3 textures and make a single texture out of it by packing them. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to actually pack to what's called an AORM, which is ambient occlusion, roughness, and metal. You also may see an RMA, is another common acronym. This one is indicating that we're going to pack those 3 together. So let's go do that, and we're going to do that in GIMP. So over in GIMP, I've opened GIMP up. I've done File, Open, and I've opened each of the 3 image textures, our ambient occlusion, our roughness, and our metallic. Now, our metallic is actually all 0. So we could, in theory, just use a constant 0 for this rock. But you might have downloaded something that has some black and white image here for your metallic, or grayscale for your metallic, and you'll want to be able to pack this AORM texture, even though our last channel, our metallic channel, will have no data in it. So the first thing we need to do is to double check or convert these to be grayscales. So right here, you'll notice that the image mode is RGB, which means this image is comprised of 3 channels, a red, a green, and a blue, that when combined make this grayscale image. So we're going to go ahead and convert this to grayscale by simply taking the mode to grayscale. Now this image is gray. We're going to do that for each of them. We're going to make them all grayscales. All right, so we now have 3 layers that are grayscales. At this point, if I wanted to save even more memory, I could convert these from the 2K textures that they are. So they're 20 by 48 by 20 by 48. I could make them 1024 by 1024 by shrinking them all to be 1K textures before assembling the three of them together. In this case, we're going to leave it as a 2K texture and keep going. With our three grayscale images now, we're going to create a new image by using the component compose. And so if I wanted to decompose, I would take an image into its parts. So let's do this. Let's make a new image, just so you get the concept. We're gonna make a new image. We're gonna make it 3 channels. It fills with the background of this pink color, and I'm going to paint much thicker. $12 on it. Then I'm going to go to my color components decompose. And with that, and decompose into the RGB channels. And you'll see that my image is made up of a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. Effectively, which is what we want our 3 images to be contained in a single image, just like these two are. So we're not going to save that. We're not going to save that. We're going to go colors, components, compose. And we want to compose in RGB. And in the red channel, we're going to put our ambient occlusion, because it's an AORM. In our green channel, we're going to put our R. And in our last channel, we're going to put our metal. So it's AORM, stands for the way you name that. And then when we do this, we end up with this tile. And if you look through the editor, you will see lots of tiles that kind of look like this in this color profile. So now I'm going to go save that as T-Rock AORM. And just to give you one last view, we're going to decompose this so you get the idea. We're going to do color, components, decompose, RGB channels, and you'll see that it contains the 3 maps that we started with. The ambient occlusion is in the red channel, the roughness is in the green channel, and the metallic is in the blue channel. So now we can hop back into our editor. Grab our new texture. And let's go to our rock material, which looked like this. We're going to keep this one, and we're going to keep that one. We'll keep one of these. Don't need that. We don't need that. We're going to put the red channel in the ambient occlusion channel. We're going to put the green channel in our roughness. And we're going to put the blue channel in our metallic. And basically what we've been able to do is shrink the footprint needed. Oh, and then we have to actually add the rock. The packed texture now means our memory footprint is down to 3 files. There are other optimizations you can do, but typically you need the normal map. You need a packed texture like this, and then you need your color diffuse, which you could of course multiply by a tint. So if you multiply that, promote that to a parameter, call that tint, and set your tint into your base color. And now we have a very black rock. Sorry, I should have done that with a a vector parameter. And call that tint. And then you could change the tint factor of your stone by multiplying this color with this tint and giving you this effect. We'll save that. And our rock is now taking up less memory. We've tinted it a slightly different color. I really don't like how shiny it is. The shine factor on this is quite high. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. We took an asset in the marketplace, fixed the UVs so that our texture would apply normally. We moved the pivot points so that we could move them around the world appropriately. We got a PBR texture pack, packed those roughness, ambient inclusion, and metallic channels into a packed texture to save memory, and that should do it for this video. So hopefully we'll do more of these in this new environment series. Thanks for watching.